Okay, so we are now class on variable, its meaning, and kinds. So what is a variable? Variable class is a property that takes on a different values. Okay? So let's say for example, yung x in math, right? Yung variable x natin, it takes different values. So if you use it maybe in this equation, so it could be that the value of x is different. If you use it in quadratic, it could be that the value of x is different. Okay? So any variable is having different values. So precisely, a variable is a symbol to which numerals or maybe values are assigned. Okay? Let's say like in math, variables, the very common variables that we are using is the variable x and y, which represents a value. Okay, so we are assigning, let's say for example, let x represent the age of Maria, for example, and let variable y represents the age of Max. So something like that. So it's a symbol that we used. Also, class, variable is a characteristic that differs from one research subject to another. Take note, differs. So, let's say for example, in your study, you are trying to study the ages of the students, for example. So, of course, the age varies from each respondent. Like say for example, Maria is 10 years old. Max is 18 years old. Marie is, let's say, 11 years old. So there there are differences, okay, in that variable. So age, their class, age is considered to be a variable. Okay? Or it could be height. The heights of each respondents varies in each respondents. So it could be that this person here is 5 foot or 5 feet, so on and so. Now what if class, what if in your study, let's say for example the age is the same. All your respondents is, let's say, 20 years old. What if this is the case? Then class, it is not already variable. If that happens, then our age there is already considered as constant. Can you follow? So we only refer those properties that varies. Okay, so you have to determine that in your study, for example. So ano dito yung mga bagay na nagbabago as we go through our study. O let's say for example in our EE, in our, let's say for example, you are designing and fabricating a circuit trainer. So as you go through your experiments, let's say you are making or you are trying to fabricate circuit trainer in electrical circuits 1. So of course the experiments involved in the circuits 1, you have there the voltages, the current, the resistances. So you can conclude that your variables in there is voltage, current, and resistance, because class, as you go through the experiments, right, the voltage is not constant, because at a certain time maybe the measured voltage is, let's say, 220. At 12 noon, let's say the voltage is 223. It happens, class. Okay, so if you think that component or that property is varying, then it is considered as variable. Now, if all the research, for example, are males, so therefore the gender, okay, is not considered as variable. For example, yung in-interview mo na mga respondents is puro lalaki lang or puro babae lang. So, hindi mo na mako-consider yung gender as your variable. You cannot include it to be one of your variables. Therefore, class, constant, okay, is a characteristic that does not change from one research to another research. Okay, it is somewhat the opposite of the variable. Now, class, there are several ways on how we can classify variables. But most important and useful way is to classify variables according to this one. It's according to their relationship with other variables. Okay? And the common to this is the independent and the dependent variable. Okay? These two, dependent and independent. This classification, class, is very useful. It's because we can apply it in conceptualizing and designing our research and in communicating the results of our research. So what really is independent? Independent is considered as the cause or the variable that makes the difference in the dependent variable. Okay? He is the cause why there's changes in dependent. Let's say, for example, our independent is X and our dependent is Y. So, the value of Y will depend on the value of X. So, if X is added by 2, then Y will be what? Will also be affected. Can you follow? So, whatever happens to the independent will also happen to your dependent. Kasi from the term itself, class, dependent variable is the one that is affected or it depends on the independent variable. Okay? So, the dependent, class, is the effect. If the independent is the cause, then your dependent variable is the effect. Okay? The independent variable, class, is the antecedent. Okay, that's the other term, antecedent, while your dependent is your consequent. Now, in experimental research, class, the independent variable is the variable that we manipulate. What do we do with this variable? Do we add it or do we change it? Do we vary it? Okay? So, what if for example, you have already determined your variables. So just let's say, for example, the one that we have, what do you call this? Fabrication of your circuit trainer. So, we have said that some of the variables there is your voltage, current, and resistance, right? So, among those variables, so what do you think is the one that you manipulate? It's the voltage, right? It's the one that you manipulate because in the circuit trainer, it could be that you choose your source to be, let's say, 24 volts, or it could be 12 volts, or it could be 9 volts, 3 volts, 5 volts. You can choose. So you are manipulating it. So therefore, voltage there is considered to be independent variable. Now, how about for the current? Current now, class, is considered to be dependent variable because your current will change depending on your voltage, right? Depending on your voltage. So, current there will be considered as your dependent variable. Okay? I hope that you can now imagine your research. As well as, class, if for example you are having your resistances or capacitances in your circuit trainer, so the values of your resistors, capacitors will also depend upon you. Okay, it could be that you will use a varistor or you have a variable resistor. So you are also varying the resistors, right? So if you vary the resistor, that's already considered as independent. So once you vary the resistors, what will happen to your current? So it will also change. So voltage and resistors there or resistance there is considered to be independent and your current is your dependent variable. Do you get, class? Do you get the difference? Okay. Now, aside class from independent and dependent variable, in experimental research, we call active variables the one that we manipulate, or the manipulated variables. Okay? Manipulated variables. And the measured variables is what we call attribute variables. Again, classes, this is only for experimental research. Okay? Again, the active variable is the one manipulated, while the attribute, the one you measured. So just like for example, in our experiment, voltage, current, and resistance. So, in your voltage, you manipulate it, right? Even your resistance, you manipulate it. Now, you now measure your current. So, as you measure the current, it is considered as your attribute variable. Can you follow? Okay. Now, how about this extraneous, or the other term, by the way, is confounding. Extraneous or confounding variable. From the term itself, extra, which means, class, that this is not part, or it is not included in your experiment, but it interferes with your result. Take note, it is not part, but it interferes. It could be that in your study, so there are things that you don't expect that will affect your study. Let's say for example, class, the fluctuation of the voltage, right? So it doesn't, or it is not included in your study, because you are just focusing on the fabricating of the circuit trainer, what else? Experimenting using the circuit trainer, right? Because you're only focused on the voltage, current, and the resistance. But then here comes the fluctuation of the voltage. You don't control such things, right? You don't control that, but it interferes during your experiment. So it could be at the moment that you test your, or you experiment, the voltage is low, so it will affect on the result. Now, let's say after how many hours, the voltage now is back to its normal voltage. So what will happen? You will again take a different result. So therefore, class, it really affects your result, although you don't expect on it. Okay? It interferes with your independent variable. So let's say you want to take 220 volts, but then at that time, this low voltage, let's say less than 220. So how can you attain a current of this if your voltage is 220? So therefore, the fluctuation of voltage is what we consider as extraneous or confounding variable. Okay? What else? How about this continuous and categorical? We can also classify, class, variables as continuous or categorical. Continuous, class, example of this is your monthly income. Okay? Monthly income sa mga nagtatrabaho, let's say hourly, their wage is based on the hourly. Diba? Yung income nila is based on hourly. So for example, you only work for, let's say, 6 hours a day. So of course, the income that you will receive is only based on the 6 hours. But if you work, let's say, overtime, so your income will also be higher. Can you follow? So there's variability, or there is variance, of course. Continuous, considered as continuous. So, continuous variable, class, these are variables which we assign to a set of numerical values in pesos. Or how about for the categorical? Categorical, we use it on specific values. And we have two types of categorical class. It could be dichotomy, or it could be polytomy, or polytomy. I'm sorry. Polytomy or dichotomy. Ano yung dichotomy? Dichotomy, from the term itself, di, which means it has two values. Okay? Two values, such as, for example, the gender. Right? The gender, it could be male or female. Or maybe you are trying to categorize the attitude. So it could be that you agree or disagree, or it could be satisfied or dissatisfied, or it could be with respect to the employment, employed or unemployed, somewhat opposite. Okay, so dichotomy means two values, yes or no, or something positive and negative. Okay, so that's an example of categorical value, category. But when you say continuous, so you take a justifiable set of value. So there's value class. Okay. Now, a variable class can also be classified into quantitative or qualitative variable. This one. Quantitative, from the term itself, quantity or the amount. Okay? It takes numerical values. Let's say, for example, your age, your weight, the height, the monthly income of a respondent. It could be the intelligence. So each respondents have different ages, have different weights, have different monthly income, has different level of intelligence. Okay, so they are considered as quantitative variable. Now, we have two types of, or two classifications of quantitative. It could be discrete or continuous. When we say discrete, specific values, but within the range. Okay? Let's say, for example, class, when you receive your grades, okay, it could be 1.5, 1.75, 2, 2.5. Take note, there's specific values from 1, papuntang 3. Let's say, 3, you will be given 3 if your grade is ranging from, let's say, 50 to 55. You will be given a grade of 2.75 if your grade is, let's say, 56 to 60. Something like that. So, the specific value, 3, has a basis within that range. Do you get my point, class? That is an example of discrete variable. While for the continuous is any value within a range. Again, continuous is any value within a range. Again yung discrete, specific value within a range. Specific value within a range. Yung continuous, any value within the range. For example, your grade, let's say, hindi yung sa grading system natin. Let's say you have 1 point, grade point average siya, for example, average. Let's say, for example, you're applying for a scholarship, for example. So, your weighted average or your grade point average is, let's say, 1.73. Okay? So, 1.73, di ba wala siya doon sa ano natin, sa grading talaga? Kasi yung grading lang natin is 3, 2.75, 2.5, 2.25, 2, so on and so forth. So, wala doong 1.73, but you know that 1.73 is within your range. So, any of that. So, it could be na hindi talagang specific. Do you get my point, class? So, that is continuous variable. So, class, is very important that you distinguish the two. Now, how about class for the qualitative? From the term itself, quality. So, these are not numbers class, ha? But it is a qualitative measure. Let's say, for example, the degree finished by the respondents. Of course, it could be that his level of education is, let's say, college graduate, or it could be he is high school graduate, or maybe a doctorate or a masteral. The gender class. Gender is considered as qualitative because the gender is expressed as male or female. So it is words, not numbers. While for the color, we also have the favorite brand of soap. It could be the colors that he like. Okay, the religion class is considered as qualitative variable. So these are class the or some of the variables which is according to the relationship with other variables. And it's very important class that you know the classification of the variables involved in your research. It is very crucial. It's because class it is your basis in determining the appropriate statistical tool in analyzing the collected data. Okay? Now, there are two ways class on how we could define variables in research. Okay? One way is by constitutive or the conceptual definition, and the other one is the operational definition. What is this constitutive or the conceptual definition? This type of definition class is when you define a certain phrase or word using other words. Okay? Or simple saying, it is based from a dictionary. Okay? You're describing it. Let's say, for example, intelligence. The word intelligence. How do you define intelligence? It's the ability to think abstractly, right? That's how we define intelligence. Now, that is an example of constitutive or conceptual definition. Now, how about operational? From the term itself, operation, you are giving meaning to a variable which specifies the operations needed to measure it. Okay? It is somewhat a manual instruction of the researcher to measure the variable. So it is you that will give definition or will assign meaning to that variable. So take note class that it is not a dictionary definition, or we cannot find it in dictionary. These terms that you do in your operational definition cannot be found in any dictionary because you are the one assigning it somewhat. Let's say, for example, you have the word, for example, inrush current, for example, inrush current. If you search class in the dictionary, you cannot find the whole term inrush current. You can only find the current. Okay? But, I'm sorry. But the word inrush current, in order for your readers to understand it, so you will give your own definition. Can you follow? Yes. So it's somewhat, you are giving the manual instruction on how to measure it. Also class, this operational definition is not a glossary. Can you observe there in your books, some of the books, at the back of the book, there's glossary there. So glossary is somewhat like a dictionary also, which defines words that are commonly used in your book. But like you said, this operational definition is not a glossary. So some of the example class of your operational definition is, for example, annual income. Okay? If you search in the internet, there's no such thing as the word annual income. Only income and only annual, right? So how do you define annual income? So you can define it as let's say the annual income is, let's say you use it in your study. For example, in your study is about farmers. Okay? So you have used the term annual income. So what do you mean by annual income there? Is it the income of the people in office work, or what? Or the common annual income, the yearly income, something like that. So you have to define it. So let's say annual income is the gross income of the farmer in 2 cropping sessions. So if you can observe, yung annual income pala na minimin mo dito is hindi pala yearly, but rather you refer it to pang dalawang ano na yun, pang dalawang seasons pa lang pala. Do you get what I mean? So hindi siya yung common na definition na alam ng normal, or what I mean by normal, ng common na tao. You follow? So you assign meaning to that variable depende sa kung saan mo siya ginamit. So you have to define really it, class. Okay?